What's up with this double portion of my spirit stuff? We're going to be dealing with Elisha, we're going to be dealing with Elijah, and we're going to look into the fact that Elisha wanted to inherit a double portion of Elijah's spirit. Pretty weird stuff, and we're going to dig into that. Today we're looking at 2 Kings 1 to 4, and it kind of feels like a lot of really popular stories kind of back to back to back. It's weird how you go from reading like kind of strange passages and then all of a sudden like all the stories you know are packed into one spot. But that's what's going on today.
So we start out 2 Kings with chapter 1, where it's Elijah is on the scene first. And he's basically like telling Ahaziah where to stick it.
There's a lot of cool stuff here. So first of all, Ahaziah, whatever.
Oh yeah, I don't know how to say it.
He's asking his people to go and speak to Baal-Zebub, or Beelzebub, or whatever you want to call it. This is most likely an intentional misspelling from the author of this book.
I wondered.
Because it like Baal-Zebub means basically like Lord of the Flies. That's what it means. Lord of the Flies. Most likely what they would call Baal was Baal-Zebul, which means Baal the Exalted or Baal the Master. So probably we're getting a little bit of snark from the original author of 2 Kings. The author basically making fun of Baal's name in the text the way it was written. So it's pretty funny. And basically, like, Ahaziah is sending this delegation to this false god because there's no one that will talk to them on behalf of the real God in Israel. So this is going to become an issue with Elijah. Elijah's going to pick a fight over this. The other interesting thing that I picked up in chapter 1, and then like you were kind of hitting your stride on this, verse 8 talks about Elijah's physical appearance. He wore a garment of hair and a belt of leather about his waist. This is why John the Baptist is referred to as the new Elijah, because John the Baptist is literally styling himself after Elijah.
That's kind of funny, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, man. So I guess basically Elijah is like, hey, why are you calling on Baal-Zebub? Why are you doing that? And over again, Ahaziah, he sends basically like a messenger and 50 men three times to go and ask this to Elijah after Elijah's like, hey, knock it off. And every time he's like, hey, thanks for coming to ask, but God's going to send down fire on you and like quit asking me. Like
Toast.
Yeah, exactly. So at least 100 men
are
killed because of this.
There's 3 different delegations. This is not the first time we've seen fire called down.
Mm-hmm.
So Elijah seems to be able to do this. Later on, disciples are going to ask to do this, and Jesus is going to be like, hey, just chill out, guys. It's okay.
Mm-hmm.
But Elijah calls down fire on the first delegation. He calls down fire on the second delegation. And the third delegation is like, yo, please stop. Like, please don't burn us up. We would like to not do that.
Don't kill the messenger situation for sure here.
What's interesting about this, we've been talking about at length lately, how a wicked leader just leads people to slaughter over and over and over. A wicked leader produces a wicked organization. And so here we have Ahaziah just sending his guys to be burnt to a crisp, and they obediently go and do it because their hearts are just as crooked as his. And so it's interesting that this third group is like, no, we'll serve the Lord. We promise. Please don't burn us up.
So the whole reason that Ahaziah was asking about this anyway was because he wanted to know if he was going to recover from a sickness. And so Elijah finally comes to where Ahaziah is, and he says, hey, it's not going to happen. Like, what's going to happen to you is, like, you are surely going to die. You're never coming down from where you are. So, and it goes on to say that he does eventually die because of said sickness. So we move into chapter 2.
Yeah.
And chapter 2 is really interesting because all of a sudden, Elisha is just, boom, on the scene, basically like a disciple, an assistant to Elijah in his work that he is doing as a prophet.
We did see him earlier. He wanted to follow Elijah, and he burned up his oxen. He burned up his farm equipment.
Yeah, but that was like a second of story.
So he was introduced to us before, but now we're really getting to know who he is. And so he's traveling with Elijah. You get kind of some like Ruth and Naomi vibes, where Elijah is like, "Hey, go home," and he's like, "Nope, I am not leaving your side.
Yeah.
Like where you go is where I go. Your God is going to be my God. I am going to serve you." And so Elijah goes on this journey to 3 different cities. There are apparently like delegations of prophets in those cities, most likely because they are both wicked cities that are far from God, but also cities that somehow host like real prophets at the same time. And so Elijah is going to cross the Jordan and part the sea, and then he just meets these different delegations. And for some reason, each time he meets these people, it's like, "Hey, do you know he's going to disappear?" Yes. "Hey, do you know he's going to disappear?" Yes.
He says, "Yes, I know it. Keep quiet." He's almost like salty about it. Like, "Yeah, I know it's coming. Just be quiet. Let me enjoy this moment, these moments." So eventually, before Elijah is taken up into heaven, Elisha does ask him, like, "Hey, if there's anything that you're going to give to me, please let it be." What did you say?
He wants a double portion of his spirit.
Yes.
So this is kind of a play on words a little bit, in that in that time the firstborn son would expect a double portion of the inheritance from his father. And so Elisha is playing a little bit on what a son would expect from his father. So he's obviously saying that he's very committed to Elijah. Elijah is showing that he's very committed to Elisha. It is unique, obviously, that you would expect a double portion of some kind of spiritual nature. So the reader would kind of be like, "Hey, how's this going to play out? I'm not sure. Like, I understand the father-son thing, but I'm not sure about the spirit thing." And so what's interesting is that the author is showing us immediately that Elisha is able to do the things that Elijah was able to do. So as soon as Elijah is carried up into heaven, in a pretty low-key event with like a fire of chariots and fire horses and stuff, Elisha is going to part the Jordan just like Elijah did, and that confirms for us, okay, like God's Spirit is on Elisha, and he is going to continue the work of Elijah.
It's interesting too, in our study Bible, it says down in the I always forget what it's called. What's it called?
The notes.
Yeah, thanks. Whatever. For verse 10, where it basically, this is after Elisha requests that double portion, Elijah says that you've asked a hard thing. And it is interesting because I was like, oh, I wonder why that was like a hard thing. Our Bible basically just says it's unclear why this would have been a hard thing, since Elisha was chosen by God to succeed him anyway.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting, because I was like, that doesn't really make sense to me. But
I wonder if he's referring to just the role.
Maybe,
like,
that could be.
Imagine, like, Elijah is, like, obviously God is on his side.
Mm-hmm.
But it has not necessarily always been easy for Elijah. Like, he confronts the prophets of Baal, and then he hides in a cave for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So he has kind of this ebb and flow of, like, power and sort of, like, sadness. And this is not an easy job. Like, it's not easy to have the mantle of Elijah. Sure, it's cool that he can move in God's Spirit in powerful ways. But God is oftentimes asking him to speak out against people that are very powerful people. Like Ahab and Jezebel were no joke.
Mm-hmm.
And so Ahaziah, I'm sure, was also no joke. So it's obvious that there is some spiritual blessing that falls on him. And it's obvious from the rest of the chapters that he starts to walk in it.
Cool thing, too, from verses 11 to 13 in chapter 2. It talks about the last time that we would have seen or heard of the divine army that would have been coming on those chariots of fire and horses of fire. Were last seen waging war on Ahab. So that's kind of crazy too. So like same kind of authority coming down that took out Ahab is also the same ones that are coming to like whisk away Elijah, which is very interesting. So then we have all of chapter 3. Do you want to mention anything from chapter 3?
Chapter 3 is basically this giant army is going to come against Israel. Israel is going to ally with Judah. You do see the king of Judah kind of being uneasy, making sure that they are hearing from the Lord. So we've read stories like that already before, because Judah, while they do have wicked kings just like Israel does, they seem to be a little bit more hesitant about just falling completely into idolatry like Israel is. And so God delivers Israel and Judah in a pretty magnificent way. He brings water where there was no water. He tricks the armies of the Moabites to think that there's just like giant pools of blood everywhere. And that allows them to be drawn into an ambush and be utterly defeated. So here God allows Israel and Judah to work together to win a war they had no business winning. And because of that, they are ultimately they're sustained until it is time for them to be judged. It was not time for them to be judged yet.
So then we see Elisha's journey kind of expanding as he is now kind of playing it solo without Elijah anymore. But he goes and he finds a widow and her son, and they, I guess, are in need of oil.
They're actually in need of money, really.
Well, that would provide the money.
Yeah, the oil is a way to provide income because she's indebted and she's going to have to sell her sons to indentured servitude to be able to pay her bills.
Mm-hmm. So basically, what he says is, hey, go get what you have and just start start pouring it into all these empty vessels. Okay, so they have all these vessels that they need to keep pouring, and they eventually get to the point where she's like, okay, bring some more, and the son's like, we don't have any more. Like, we've filled all of them with that little bit that you started with. And after that, the oil stops flowing, and they were able to pay their debts, and their son, and she and her son could live on whatever they had left over. And what's so crazy about this, way back when we were reading about Elijah, when he was fleeing, he had met a widow who was able to provide for him the little cakes and water from the very little that she had, because she was like, hey, I would love to give you water, but I can't give you cakes because I only have enough for my son and myself. And he's like, no, just go back and prepare it for me. Give me mine first, and then you guys will have enough for yourself. And sure enough, they did. So Elijah and Elisha have, in this instance, and others that we'll see, very similar stories in that, like, the Lord provides far more than what was needed for both Elijah and Elisha in their situations. Then we move into Elisha and a Shunammite woman, which comes next. And tell me a little bit more about this one, Ryan.
Well, basically, this woman provides a little bit of a hotel for Elisha as he's traveling around, and he's thankful for that. So he says, "Hey, what do you need?" And she's hesitant to say anything, but he notices she doesn't have a son, so he prays that she would have a son, and then he prophesies that she will, in fact, and so she does. And the text doesn't say how old he is, I don't think, but you get the idea that she enjoys her son for quite a while. And then one day he's sick and suddenly dies. And so Elisha is able to raise him from the dead. They try a couple different ways that don't work until he actually goes to her house and lays on the child and brings the child back to life.
Which is also, again, another callback to something that Elijah had done previously, where the woman's son, it's the widow's son, actually dies, and he goes in, does a very similar thing where he just lays over top of the child, and the child all of a sudden just breathes life again, and boom, right back at it.
So Elisha is very similar to Elijah, rather. I think the striking thing as we read over these stories is that Jesus also seems to do very similar miracles. He obviously, lots of people know about, he raises Lazarus from the dead. He doesn't necessarily part water. He walks on water.
The water and turns into wine.
Yeah.
So there's, again, something
miraculous
provided.
multiplication. Yeah. One of the final stories in chapter 4 of 2 Kings is that Elisha is able to miraculously multiply some stew. First of all, he heals stew so it's not deadly. And then he also just multiplies it for the 100 people that are there to eat it. Which immediately makes you think of Jesus feeding the 5,000. And even the reaction of the people that are there is very similar. They're like, oh, this is only a small pot of stew. How will it feed all these people? And then with Jesus, you get, oh, this is only, a loaf and a fish. How will this feed all these people? So these miracles are similar. And I think, to me, Elijah is only foreshadowing Jesus. Elisha is only foreshadowing Jesus. And when the people see the miracles that Jesus is doing, their minds would have been immediately drawn to these stories that they knew from, to them, very old history that would have communicated, oh, the Lord is moving in our day. I need to listen to what this man has to say because he is doing the things that we've heard about. And ultimately, like, Jesus is preaching to them and showing with his actions and also preaching with his words that he is not Elijah or Elisha. He is, in fact, the Son of God. And so it makes sense that when people saw Jesus, they thought maybe he was Elijah, maybe he was the returning Elijah. That's not true. That was John the Baptist. But Jesus ultimately is the one that all these people were foreshadowing. So as far as what our reading has for us as a your part, take your pick today. There is a lot in here. I think one of the things that's really interesting is that Jesus will teach that if you have a small amount of faith, you are able to move mountains. And here you see Elijah, he's just a normal dude. Elisha, just a normal dude. They have an incredible blessing of God's Spirit on their lives. God's Spirit does not bless only certain people anymore. It blesses all believers. And so we want to be in tune with God's Spirit. We want to hear God's voice, and we want to walk in obedience to him. And so I would just invite you, like, be obedient to the Lord's Spirit in your life. Don't hinder God's Spirit in your life. Hear his voice and follow his words. So we'll be back tomorrow. We'll see you then.
Thanks so much for listening to God's Plan, Your Part. If anything stuck out to you, if you have any questions, or if you'd like to receive a Bible, you can email us at godsplanyourpart@gmail.com. Also, if you're enjoying the podcast, please consider supporting us through the link in our description. We love that you're on this journey with us, and we hope you have a great day. See you tomorrow.